Notebooks out while you're waiting. Get ready to go. Jimmy, here we go. Ben, there. Lily, Archie, not here. And Lisa, and Felix, Zane, Casey. Hold on, I said Casey. Casey, yeah. Annabelle? Annabelle's not yet back. Ooh, there we go. Where was that? Annabelle. Ava. Ava Heenan here. Oh, there you are. Clara. There. William K.
Yeah.
William Lee. Here. Kate Martin. Here. Violet. Yeah. Brendan. Yeah. Hugo. Here. Parker. Here. And Ed. Yeah. Karen Van Fleet is not in. Kate. And Anderson. Excellent. All who are supposed to be here are here. Okay, we're going to jump straight in. There'll probably be a court case we'll look at today. And just as a heads up, the topics we will do with consent, both of them are going to be reasonably heavy. Canada has a euthanasia law, which I found out 2 days ago in a debate in the US was one of the reasons they say you don't want national health care, because otherwise death panels in Canada are randomly killing people. Which I was surprised to learn. Those Americans know everything. And we will probably also discuss the topic of abortion. So 2 heavy topics will be coming up as we're doing consent, doctor-patient relationship. At the end of this, so as a reminder, we started off with consent. It must be informed, voluntary, and competent. It's your right. It is not a duty. You can waive your ability to have consent. You can say, doctor, do whatever you want. I don't care. I trust you. And that's absolutely fine. You have types of consent, and I think we finished all of that. Explicit, which is, of course, the best kind of consent. But there's presumed and implied, and all of those kind of can work, but depending on the type of relationship. If you have a long-standing relationship with a doctor and they know you really well, well, then an implied consent might actually be okay. Entailed, following logically from something else you've already consented to. If you consent for an operation, you're consenting for anesthetic, as an example. And then we went through a variety of examples. And then we went on right to the types of informed consent. How can you inform someone what their rights are? So this is going to be a section of notes. point form, don't write down every word, but you need the sketch of the details. And that is, you are entitled, in this type of consent, every single possible detail that could go wrong, might go well, even if they're secondary or tertiary outcomes. So, absolutely everything that could possibly be known. And then I'm going to ask you, what is the problem with this type of consent? I mean, it sounds great, but there is a problem. Leave that hanging for a moment. Did I save it to this? And just to double check, we didn't do this before you left, right? This is where we left off. Yeah. Okay. I didn't move the slide around. Let's say we apply the standards to Brentwood. You're going to go to the movies, and we have to provide a complete disclosure to your parents of all the risks that might undertake. What would be the problem with that? That hand I think I saw first in there. Go. Yep.
It may be like, there may be like too much information or like non-essential information or just information that may not be like very important.
I think that's getting to really, it is a lot of information, so that is a good key point.
Oh, like you don't know what can go wrong. So like
There is the unknown unknowns, so you don't know everything. But this would only apply everything that could be known. Yes?
It could dissuade a person from like doing something but for the wrong reasons. Like
Ooh,
like
that's a
for
good
instance,
point.
like going to a movie, if you
Yeah.
like tell them too much, they'll be like, maybe I don't want to go to the movies, even though they probably like it wouldn't hurt them to go.
I think that's it's not normally considered for ethical reasons because it's always their choice. But I like, this is probably a good point, particularly when, for example, we know if you disclose the side effects of a medication to a patient, they are 3 times more likely to get the side effect. So if I tell you that the risk of taking this is a headache, you are 3 times more likely to get the headache than if I didn't tell you. And that's not even someone else making the decision. That's just only you involved. If I told you that if you went to Victoria, there's a chance of you being kidnapped, your parents probably would say, well, then they shouldn't be allowed to go to Victoria to go to a movie yet. But the chance is so low. Did we really need to? Is that reasonable? Is that? I'm summarizing. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that particular one, but yes, we could encourage people to make bad decisions because we're including things of such low risk that people don't are good at math. Another one. More of a practical one. Should Brentwood? Yes?
Oh,
No, go.
back on the all relevant information,
Mhm.
if it's like a lot, some people might just not have the time to read it all or like listen to it all.
But no, when you get the page, when it comes up and said you have to agree to the terms,
Yeah.
you read through all of that first, right?
no.
Everybody here does that. And just all through that. Any of you played Baldur's Gate 3? And I only bring that up because I started reading the terms and condition. They are very good. The terms and conditions in Baldur's Gate 3, you start reading, they're normal. And somewhere around halfway through, it has an area where it tells you that if you sell your soul to the, people of hellish origin, that the term, they can nullify your ownership of the game and all sorts of other things inside of there. It's written quite tongue-in-cheek. There are contracts that people have found where somewhere in the middle it says, by the way, if you read this and you write to us and you're the first person, you get $4,000. A band did that once, and I think it was 8 years before they got a letter. They were just curious how many people read it. And if you put something in the middle of something that is silly, that doesn't negate the rest of the contract. That part is just crossed out by the lawyers. It's like, oh, well, obviously that doesn't apply. All the other stuff is still relevant, so they can bury stuff deep in there. There's one particular group that put in that you promised your firstborn by clicking agree. Now, of course, you can't because that's illegal, but it was still there.
Could they theoretically revoke my copy of the game if I did sell my soul to a hellish source?
No, you'd have to prove all sorts of things in court that the court doesn't want to get involved with.
But,
like their
but if I
existence.
did somehow prove that, like, hellish beings existed and I sold my soul to them, could they revoke my copy of the game?
In the unlikely event you managed to prove to a court that the conditions in which they wrote that clause actually existed, you would have sexually harmed yourself. And then they could probably enforce it. There is the practical one, not just that, I think Ben said it too, like there's stuff you don't know. Even if it is known, expecting a doctor to know all of it would be untenable too. Nobody knows everything. Even if that stuff exists out there in the world, it's hard to know. And so these tiny little risks. Now, that being said, if you read the document you signed for Brentwood, it does say that the school goes on trips to a local metropolitan city, Victoria, and I don't really know how much the word metropolitan applies to Victoria, but anyway. And they do list the risks of going to a major city, and the risk of kidnapping is in there. But luckily, you have been saved from your worry that they would get too afraid by the fact that I'm pretty sure none of your parents or yourselves have read it. So in that sense, you're good to go. But we put that in there, risk of losing your eye during paintball and all sorts of stuff is in there. And because these are real and foreseeable risks, and they may be low, but we do a lot of things on campus that are quite dangerous, like pottery. You could burn yourself quite badly, or, as the document states, accidentally get locked in the furnace room. Professional disclosure. This was used for quite a long time in the UK. They have been slowly changing, but weirdly not through direct legislation. It's just like the doctors are like, I don't know if I agree with this. So I'm kind of giving you a hint. This is not the best kind of informing. But this is a standard we used to have for particular events, and that changed here as well. Even though it wasn't mandated to disclose all and only that information that a similarly placed doctor would give you. So for our terms and conditions, come to Brentwood, we tell you all this stuff. But for us, then, we wouldn't have to tell you, if we were using the first one, the complete, we would just have to look and say, what does Shawnigan tell you? What do other schools tell you? And we take a look at it, it's like, oh, we only have to tell them this. What's the problem with that type of school?
It may not apply to your specific situation.
It may not apply, but you can adapt it. Like if it talks about waterfront safety and you don't have a waterfront, you could exclude it. I don't think that would be a particular problem with this type of disclosure, because we have a lot of stuff on waterfront. Yeah.
The standard could be worse than like something you come up with yourself.
It could be a lot worse. If you take a surgery, so we're talking about doctors here, and there's a 25% chance that you die in the operating table, but no other doctor discloses that, then you can go, oh, I don't have to disclose it either. Now, that's a really bad standard, but you're protected because it's just what everybody else does. It's just what everybody else does is not the best types of informing. It's not taking the patient into account at all. It's putting everything on the doctors, and they get to not disclose it. So if all the independent schools, as we are an independent school and not a private school, got together and said, you know what, we're just not going to tell anybody about the risks of full contact yoga. There's a risk of twisting your neck in half in certain poses, but we're all going to agree we're not going to tell them. And then legally, if that was the disclosure that was allowed, then we would be allowed to get away with that. So it's a bit paternalistic. It is saying only the doctors know. Have we defined the word paternalistic yet? Paternalism. What does pater mean? Yep.
Like
Father. So this is a and it's modeled after the idea of a nuclear family in which there's a clear hierarchy. Dad, then mom, and then everybody else. And the father's not considered to be mean or out to get you, but father clearly makes all the decisions. In your best interests, you don't get to have any say in it. They have all the information, they know best, and they'll tell you what you should do. You don't have any input. That's known as a paternalistic system, named after that model of family. So it's authoritative. We're only looking at what the doctors think we should know. And it's not necessarily going to work out. It's not implied that they're just doing it in their own interest. The reason they use father is because one would hope that they would have the interests of their family in mind. But it is all for your own good. So this is Mr. Patel. Yeah.
So what would an example of that type of disclosure be where it's like I don't quite see how the father knows best thing applies to that type of disclosure.
I like your previous example for this one. The doctor feels that if they tell you, this particular surgery, if you don't have it, over the next year, you have an 80% chance of getting a stroke. But if you have it right now, there is a 25% chance you'll have the stroke today on that operating table. And you decide that if I tell that to the patient, they're so freaked out about operations, they won't have it, even if it's in their bed session. So I'm not going to tell them that.
So it's information that's given that like the top authority feels is the information that should be given.
It should be done. The patient has no say in it. So there might be information you feel you need to know, but the doctor doesn't have to tell you.
So it's like at the discretion of the authority.
Yeah.
But then what does that? But then that doesn't really mesh with like information that a similarly placed doctor would give.
But it's only up to the doctors. So there is a bit of a standard in there. If another doctor says, like, all the doctors get together and they're like, no, you should tell patients in that situation, then yeah, they would be forced to. But is there any patient input on that?
But isn't information given by a similar doctor different than just at the authority of a doctor?
The authority of the doctor is the doctors as a collective. Like,
Okay.
it's up to them.
Okay.
The problem in terms of its being paternalistic. So my example was an individual doctor acting paternalistically in a doctor-patient type of relationship. But if all the doctors got together to broaden it and said, you know what, patients who, this might be a future class example we'll discuss. So let's say patients who have anorexia often react badly when we tell them risk factors of this treatment, and they're less likely to get the treatment because they have to eat these types of foods, and they have a lot of issues with food. So we're not going to tell them anything about this. We're just going to make them do it. and all the doctors agree. And I said before, if I tell you about the side effect of a medication, you're 3 times more likely to get it. Doctors could then, as a group, decide, well, we're not going to tell them any of the side effects. It will lower the risk. Greatest good for the greatest number, or do no harm. Patients do often have a right to know, and even if that increases the risk of that side effect could have a really debilitating impact on whoever they are, whether it's hand tremors and they're someone who needs fine motor control or anything. So patients often have a right to know. And so when it's only the doctor making the decision, we're not taking anything into consideration of the patient. So the problem with it is the top-down authority version.
Why are you more likely to get side effects if you know about them?
The nocebo effect. I've shown you the little film of the placebo effect, where the guy talks about different colored pills and everything.
So do you like actually have it or is it like
If you have heard all your life, or well, not all your life, you just believe for whatever reason that a certain thing causes a certain problem, you're just more likely to get the effects. One of the greatest examples is aspartame. In the early aughts, an email chain went around as a sort of little viral piece telling people that artificial sweeteners were really bad for you, could give you epilepsy, headaches, migraines, permanent brain damage, all sorts of things. And people reported that when they drank things like Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi, they would get really bad headaches. Every study they would do where they would blind taste test them and give people, artificial sweeteners and all that, they never got the headaches. But if you tell them what it was, then they did. The nocebo effect is the same thing as the placebo, except it's in the opposite direction. If you believe bad things, you're more likely to experience it. We're not entirely sure why placebo or nocebo affect, and we know even less about the nocebo because we're not, ethically, there's a restriction on deliberately causing harm to patients for just a study. So a placebo effect you can do because at most something good might happen, but a nocebo effect is harder. With the nocebo effect, they've taken leaves from a non-contact poison plant, so not poison ivy, not stinging nettle, nothing, and told people it was like poison ivy, and then rubbed it on their arm. And in some cases, people actually got welts and blisters from it, as if it was the plant that they did. These studies are old, from like the 50s, when they followed less ethics in their research studies. Yep.
Have any people been able to determine just how far you can take that kind of mental ability to basically change your body?
We don't know how much of it's even changing your body. It might just be that you're more likely to report a headache, whereas before you were more likely to ignore it. So it is really uncertain how much of a real effect it is.
Well, the rash seems pretty
The rash seems pretty real, and stomach ulcers seem pretty real. You give yourself a fake pill, put a tube down your throat, and we can see that it goes away. So it does seem to work. It also, but there is some element of reporting because animals experience the placebo effect because humans report on their symptoms, and humans are affected by if their animal is taking a placebo and they believe it to be real and may report different things. So there's a lot of nuance that we're not entirely sure why all of it happens, but it seems to work the strongest in things like pain, which are very much up to your body to decide how much you experience. So if you have a lot of pain, you have a chronic condition, you're in pain every day, you'll see this happen to people in cycles. They have a chronic condition, it's not curable, and medicine has a really difficult time trying to control pain because most of the things we do to control pain are also addictive. And so trying to manage that balance can be quite difficult. So someone who's in that position may go, well, I'm going to try, I don't want to say something someone might actually use, seaweed therapy, in which you lay seaweed down over the afflicted body parts, and the energy of the ocean washes in and washes away. And you'll find it works for 2 to 3 months, and then it stops working. The placebo effect stops responding. And then they switch to another one. And then it starts to work again for 2 to 3 months, and then they have to switch to another one. And the danger for that, why we think, we caution people against it, is often placebo effects are also very expensive. Your grandma's chicken soup for your cold is probably free, but the trip to another country to get a very expensive psychic surgery is usually really expensive, and it's draining you resources. Also, things like you are missing a leg has never been cured by the placebo effect. You are diabetic has never been cured by the placebo effect. So there are very real diseases that don't seem to respond very well at all. But pain is the best. Playing video games reduces pain. To the point, there was a serious discussion if they should put video games, I can't remember which console that we're talking about at the time, in all hospitals for mothers about to give birth. Because you're experiencing the pain, they don't necessarily want, often they don't want drugs right away. So play this video game instead, and it takes your mind off in a way that you don't experience it anymore. Subjective disclosure. We give you all the stuff that you want to know. Come to Brentwood. I want to come to Brentwood. Great. I want to take rowing. I want to be in the musical. I want to take these classes. Great. What are the dangers? Is there anything I should know? What do you want to know? I don't know. Could I drown? Well, yeah, but we have coach boats out there. Okay. Okay, sign up.
Like, if the patient is very biased towards, like, I don't know, like, for example, if they're gonna take a vaccine, instead of, like, asking for the benefits, they're just gonna look for reasons to not take it.
If it's going to reinforce their bias,
Yeah.
sure, yeah. Oh, hand? No, hand?
But with this, like, subjective disclosure, can, like, if someone was doing that for Brentwood and they did break one of the rules, could they make the argument that they didn't know?
Yes.
But, like, would the, like, other people, or would the, like, staff be like, no, you never asked?
Yeah. If this was the standard, then we could say, well, you never asked. And there wouldn't be a student handbook, which is, what do you want to know? And he says, well, here you go.
So, like, the argument that I didn't know
Wouldn't work.
Okay.
Yeah. We get away with that because we do give you a student handbook that we require you to read, and you have signed off on that long form saying that you have read it. Yes, and then yes.
So it could be like really high dangers that you wouldn't even like think of.
Yeah.
And it could be like really common or whatever. Like we have really bad lightning storms and people get struck by lightning
All the
at
time.
least 3 times a day.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't think of that because you're doing soccer.
Right.
So you wouldn't know.
You would know. Or, bears. People outside of here always seem to be scared of bears. And they just wander around here. They sometimes wander through our campus. But they are a danger of Brentwood College School that are specifically listed as one of our dangers, whether you have asked about it or not, because bears are a danger. I had a student, and they were freaked out by bears, and I couldn't understand it because they came from Australia, which, as far as I can understand from all media, is the most dangerous place on earth for animals. They have spiders this big. Yes,
I was about to say that.
they have spiders this big.
No. Like they may not ask for like the actually important details.
You're really taking advantage of patient ignorance in this. You don't know, haha, and you never will, because you don't know enough to ask the question. So there's a principle, quality and justice. We need to give the patient, by justice, ethically, justice means you give them what they deserve. And they deserve to know that there are bears around. And if they're coming here, they're consenting that they may actually have to stay inside because we're getting a bear out of a tree. If you don't know anything about the operation and you don't know there's a risk of stroke, you won't know that that's a question that you should ask. I had a student who came here after another school, and I was like, why did you stop going to that school? I was curious. And they said, well, all the pictures of the school I went to were beautiful, but when I got there, there was a dump, like literally the city dump on one side of the school, and the other side was an industrial park. It was awful. You couldn't walk in, the city was too far away, and you were just stuck, and it smelled all the time. They didn't disclose that anywhere, and they seemed to collect students whose parents wanted to send them somewhere without touring first. It was very cheap. And so, yes, private school, lovely pictures online. But if you don't ask about the locale, they're not going to tell you. Whereas Brentwood is desperate to get people on campus. Because if you've noticed, when you arrive, what's the weather like? It's nice. It's sunny. It's warm. It's beautiful. It looks like you're in a park. There's an ocean view. And then your parents leave, and then it starts to rain. And then that stays until about now. And then your parents will come back, and they'll go, oh, you've been in a park all year. And they have not seen all of the weather that happened in between. Also, if the patient does say, hey, I didn't know this was going to happen, how is the doctor to respond to that as well? If it's a legal requirement, then the patient loses out because they don't know what to ask. If they're following that standard and the patient is allowed to say, come back afterwards, then the doctor is at risk, because how can they know what the patient is going to want to know? The patient doesn't know enough to ask. This is a really difficult problem because, of course, you can have patients with all sorts of different backgrounds, and they may really have difficulty understanding. Often, it's common. I've known people, would probably be a better place, who bring a translator in whenever they see a doctor, and not like for the language, so that they can, translate the doctor speak. Doctors have gone to school. They worked hard in high school. You probably know people who want to be doctors right now. They're studying all the time and learning things. They're working way too hard. They don't have much of a social life. That continues in university, and it continues on in med school. And then when they're done, they have doctor knowledge and no social skills. And now they don't know how to talk to patients. And so sometimes they don't know how to communicate the information very well as well. Yeah. Oh yeah, if you need to go, you can just go. You already let me know. Objective reasonable person. This is the US standard. Doctor has a duty to disclose unasked whatever an objective reasonable person would want to know before deciding. Now, I think we've defined an objective reasonable person before. This is a fictional person. They don't actually exist, but it's a reasonable average person with whatever condition they happen to Is there a potential problem with this one?
The first one, the doctor may have like a different definition of what an objective, reasonable person would want to ask. And second, I guess, maybe the doctor could like sway it, like say that, like purposefully leave out details to like influence in action.
the first one, there is a problem with all of these of a doctor understanding what it is. An objective, reasonable person is that's part of the training you're supposed to go through as a doctor, is to figure out what that means. But for the leaving out information, that would be back up to paternalism. So they're not supposed to do that. Under this model, you are not to leave out something. You would be wrong to do that. Also, when I say objective, your doctor's not supposed to be an impartial, objective observer of this process. It is expected of them to be passionate advocates for the best course for your actions. It is not wrong for a doctor to want to convince you of the best course that they believe. That's their job. It's just like if you hire a contractor or somebody to build a house and you're like, I want to build it right here. And they're like, that tree's going to fall down. If you build it right there, that's going to undermine the root system. That tree's going to fall down. It's going to ruin your addition. Do not do that. And you're like, I'm paying you the money. You're going to do it anyway. Now, contractor, and we'll go over why doctors necessarily wouldn't follow that line. Anyway, but a contractor might go, okay, because you're paying them, and they'll build it. But they should be passionate about advocating that you're not doing something unpleasant to yourself without realizing it. So they're allowed to argue. So they're not the objective ones. They're supposed to be advocating for what they think the best course of action is, but not making you. So not forcing you.
It's also like very assumptive, like the doctor assumes a lot.
The doctor is assuming. What are they assuming about you? If you're a reasonable, they're assuming what a reasonable average person would want to know.
That you're a reasonable person.
Yeah. Now, the reasonable part is in law because law considers if you are worried about, I don't know, the vaccine that you're about to get has chips in it planted there by Bill Gates that will connect you to the Wi-Fi and then your brain will be taken over by China. That's an unreasonable point of view. And the law would say the doctor doesn't have to disclose that. The doctor might decide if they get enough patient going, like, where's this information coming from? Why do they think that there are chips in vaccines? Do they not know the size of chips and what it would do and what would happen? Like, it's just insane. However, they may decide to. But the law does say we don't have to cater to the entirely unreasonable. But it is in there that, like, that is an assumption. What is the other assumption? You two came back in the most sus way possible. You had an entire look on your face.
I saw him in the hallway, right?
Now you're going red. What'd you guys do?
Nothing. Literally nothing.
Okay, I'm going to ask you two. Go. What is wrong with this statement? Objective, reasonable person. So one of the things brought up is that reasonable is an assumption. It's an allowed assumption, but it is an assumption. What's the other assumption? Yeah.
Could you re-explain? What does that mean?
An objective, reasonable person is a fictional person who is oh, I used the word reasonable twice. That's stupid. Let's take that off. Put rational. Someone who can make. They're not crazy. They can understand that, you know, cause and effect. You do something, something happens after. They understand that, you know, science exists, facts exist. The entire world's not a conspiracy. They're not, what's it called? Sovereign citizens that believe in magic words. You don't have to cater to irrational people, although you might, maybe you'd want to start doing that if you got enough of them. What's the other assumption that we're making about people if we assume them to be rational, average people?
So the first assumption is just assuming that they can like function on their own.
Yeah. So that was the one, but that's allowed in law because
So
if we decided that we had to cater to every irrational person, that would be really hard.
so the other assumption is like, I don't know, they have good manners or something. Like they're not the kind of person you're gonna just stare at for kind of being loud in public or something. Like, I don't really know. But I feel like being a rational person is just like a summary.
Yeah.
Kind
So
of like a
so
target.
ignore that part.
Okay.
No, but I love that you're participating. That was a wonderful monologue. What's the other assumption? If you were assuming that someone is a rational average person, and we're ignoring rational, what are we also assuming about them?
Oh, they're boring.
Average often means boring. Yes. Do you think you're boring?
To an extent, sometimes.
Sometimes. Do you think you're average? You don't know if you're average? Do you think you're average?
No.
No. Do you think you're average? No. No. How many? Does anybody here think that they're an average person? Some of them are like, yeah, in some ways I'm average. I think if you polled chemistry teachers across Canada, I'd probably come out like an average chemistry teacher. On the other hand, I've had to put the word chemistry there. Probably not average in many ways. If you polled Canadians across the country, probably different in rather specific and unique ways. We're all unique snowflakes. You're unique, like everybody else. Yes. Pardon?
You assume that I know autistic or something.
That is the point. Everybody's not average. Everybody's not average. You've used the example of autistic, but it could be anything. Nobody is completely average. There is something unique about you. Now, not in every case, but there are enough cases where that uniqueness may have a difference on your surgery, or it may have a difference on your treatment. We have noticed all sorts of things about people that benefits may differ depending on their background. In terms of disclosure, one of the things I learned, I think, yesterday is if you go into contracting, so I'm going to skip the last one. So leave room for number 4. The rest of 4, so we have a criticism in there. And then we have a number 5. Leave a chunk. It's probably, you want to leave that much down in 4, and a good chunk to add a 5. And we're going to discuss an actual court case in Canada. To give a completely different profession and some disclosure, gentleman started working as a contractor. Joined a contractor as his team. They lay concrete, so they're the ones that go to the site and they have that big, huge tube and they can put concrete down anywhere. And he's looking around after he's been there a couple of months, and he notices nobody has teeth. All their teeth are gone, except for the foreman. He's like, why does nobody have teeth? Well, how do you have your teeth? Like what? He's like, oh, these aren't teeth. He takes them out. They're artificial teeth. Puts them back in. He's like, yeah, you won't have teeth at the end of the year. If you work in concrete, the spray from the concrete is on your face, and inevitably, some will dry in your teeth. And it binds so hard that it actually breaks a chunk off your tooth. And if you just repeat that process, eventually you lose all of your teeth. And I feel that's something they should tell you the first day you sign up to be a concrete person. Not something they casually mention to you after you started, in terms of disclosure. I think the average reasonable person would want to know that. Okay, Supreme Court of Canada, a long time ago. Wasn't decided until 1980. And case happened in 1970, so like eons. 44-year-old male underwent surgery for removal of a block. Write this down. This is a case that you'll need to refer to. Rebel versus Hughes. Surgery was performed competently. So the highlight for this, there is no question that the doctor didn't do their job. So this isn't a matter of this, if the doctor does it wrong, you get a stroke. This is an inherent risk to the surgery, And if you do everything right, sometimes you still lose. That's not unfair, that's just life. Life is unfair. You can do everything right, and everything can still go wrong. So during the surgery, the patient suffered a massive stroke, paralyzing him on his right side. There's also no doubt that there was consent for the operation. The patient had consented to the operation, and the doctor had disclosed why they needed to do it. Now, in here I haven't said, why would you get the surgery then if there's a risk of a massive stroke? Blockage of an artery, preventing 15% flow of the blood, chance of stroke over 5 years, 80%. And that's a really rough number, plus or minus 10, because I can't recall the exact number right now. But it was really high. So if you don't get this, you're probably going to have a stroke in the next little while, and we need to fix this. So patient had consented to the operation. Now the patient wasn't made aware that although the risk was less, the chance of the stroke happening, going down to 15%, was immediate at the surgery. So if you get the surgery, you have a 15% chance of getting the stroke right away. If you don't have the surgery, then over the next 5 years, you have an 80% chance of getting the stroke. All the patient knew is that 80 versus 15, time wasn't necessarily thoroughly discussed. So they weren't aware that it was going to happen right away. The patient worked for the Ford Motor Company, and they were 1.5 years away from a retirement pension. A pension is worth a lot of money. You can tell this case is old because people don't have this very often. It means that after you're done working, they will continue to pay you money for a very long time. Patient claims that he would have waited until after receiving his pension if he had been informed fully, and furthermore would have evaluated the benefits of living a shorter, full life over a crippled, longer one. I mean, the last one is probably just court case drama and talking. Would you really evaluate the benefit when your risk is 15 versus 80%? You're 80% chance you're still going to do it. He had the worst outcome, but most people who undergo that procedure don't have the worst outcome. So you tend to feel that way when you get the worst outcome. But the 1.5 years away from a retirement pension, that's a rational need.
Do you know, like, there are certain places where if you get injured in the workplace, then the place, pay you, an insurance type of thing, while you're not able to work?
Workers' compensation and things, yeah.
Is there something like that, but, if you're injured, while, for that man, while you're injured during a medical procedure, and you're unable to work?
He certainly might be put on some sort of benefits.
Could he apply for a substitute for his pension, considering that he's not able to work anymore?
Well, he couldn't apply for a substitute to his pension because that's not how workers' comp works. They don't take that into account. What would you have gotten in the future is not something they do. What he did is he sued the doctor because he said, "Doctor, you didn't inform me fully." Now the doctor's defense was, I did the objective reasonable person. Most people in the circumstances are going to weigh 15% against 80%, and rationally decide that, hey, 15%, there's a risk of stroke. I told them that. I didn't specifically put in the time delay, but that doesn't matter to the average person. And this patient claimed it mattered to me because I'm 1.5 years from the pension. If I had gotten the operation the day after, then I would still receive my pension, and even if I died, my family would receive my pension. So it made a significant financial decision. Because, of course, what did the Ford Motor Company do once he had a stroke?
Fired.
It just fired him. Now he doesn't get a pension. Yep.
Back to the objective reasonable person. I feel like reasonable is loosely defined.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for me, like, if someone said, like, Israel is planting cameras and garden gnomes to spy on American citizens, I would
Let's
consider
not
that-
use Israel because there's enough going on. Mexico,
Mexico is.
because Hugo left.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
He's Spanish? Hugo
Spain is.
is working secretly for Mexico from Spain. I'm going to change that right around and be thoroughly embarrassed. Keep going.
And so he's planting cameras and garden gnomes to
Yeah.
spy on American citizens. I would consider that unreasonable, but that person would consider that wholly reasonable because they are concerned about like their security.
Yeah. Now, if you believe that a conspiracy is happening, then all of your actions suddenly turn reasonable. But that's not the standard for the reasonable person. The reasonable person is like a legal fiction or an ethical fiction, depending, because law defines this as a standard as well, and ethics we use it as well. A reasonable person is someone who can understand cause and effect. So, given this in the past, what will happen in the future? If I light a match to a piece of paper, what's the risk? Well, your house will burn down. Like, can understand cause and effect. And can understand facts when presented with them. It doesn't actually take into account their prior knowledge. So you don't have to be it's not an average, rational, knowledgeable person. It's someone who basically understands the language in which you're speaking of, and can make rational decisions when presented with information. Now, and it gives freedom for you to say, no, I don't want those garden gnomes here. Take them back to Spain and then give them back to Mexico. So, if you're like, well, they're acting rationally, if you accept their irrational belief, well, then everything is rational. Because if you accept one irrational, then you accept all of them. Because after that, it does become rational. But we don't consider the prior knowledge. Patients are allowed to be irrational. So if they understand the consequences, and you don't understand it, you don't get this vaccine, your risk of death goes up by this much. And they're like, I don't care. There's little chips in it that Bill Gates put in there. And you're like, okay, but you understand what I said? And they go, yep, I just don't believe you. They're allowed to make that decision. And you don't have to do the research to prove that Bill Gates isn't, because that is above and beyond what's expected of you. You have presented a knowledgeable amount in the objective reasonable person standard. Now, in this standard, however, what do we have to include? What does the doctor have to do before doing the surgery now? If you're a doctor, you have a patient, you're going to do this surgery. What do you have to do?
You have to tell them that they have a 15% chance to get this stroke during this.
Well, now that you know about the specific case, but that would be like, oh, now that we've learned that, we will now tell people about the timeline. This would actually go back, that's a standard, that's almost like professional disclosure. We've now learned this is bad, so we're all going to agree to change. But the next patient might not be 1.5 years away from retirement pension. That's a very specific criteria that was unique to that patient. In a more general sense, what do you have to do now?
provide all relevant information.
Again, can't provide all relevant information. It's too much. It's hard. I'm just a doctor. I don't have this kind of time. And doctors really don't have that kind of time. They're not getting paid for it.
Is there like a separate type of disclosure where it's like all relevant information that the doctor knows?
Other doctor can know. You handed advantage to doctors that didn't keep up with relevant papers, because then the less they know, the less they have to tell you. What does the doctor do when you walk to the office and you have a problem? We need to see a doctor show. How many of you have seen House? The TV show. Excellent. It's one of the worst medical mystery shows on television. It's old. You haven't seen it. I'll pick one out. He makes terrible ethical decisions all the time. It's great for this class. Maybe we'll do that next day. Everybody lies. You walk into a doctor. You've never seen the doctor before. What's one of the first things they do?
That you do?
That they will ask you to do. Often this is out in the waiting room. I don't know how many doctors you've seen in your life, but
Sit down.
yeah. Consent to what? This is often even before you see the doctor.
Take off your shoes.
Take off your shoes, get on the scale. That actually a little bit part of it. It's informing the doctor of something. Have you ever filled out a form in a doctor's office? Maybe your parents have all done that for you. Where you go through, like, have you ever had heart disease? Have you ever taken this medication? What is that called? What is that process?
Background check?
It's a background check. A doctor would call it taking a patient history. What's unique about you? What do you need to know? And that's just the medical stuff. And then when they come in, all of you, hopefully, have a doctor who is asked to, if you have a routine doctor, that's asked to speak to you without your parents in the room. Because what else do they want to know?
Like personal stuff?
Personal stuff. Are you taking drugs regularly? Are you sexually active? What's your lifestyle like? What do they need to know to take care of your body? Should they be prescribing medication? Should you be taking an STI test? Do you need a prescription for the syphilis you just picked up last weekend? There's all sorts of stuff they need to know. You've been having issues. Someone was sharing this with me, that they had a patient in which, you know when you stand up and you get dizzy sometimes? It's just low blood pressure. It happens to lots of people. They pass out regularly. Like they stand up and they pass out, and then they regain consciousness about 30 seconds later, and then they go on with its day. This has been happening to this patient since they were since they can remember, really, 5 or 6 years old, because they can't remember much beyond that. And they have never told anybody. That has a whole host of problems associated with it. They didn't take a history and ask them about a bunch of things they wouldn't have done. Are you working in concrete? Oh, well, we might want to have a look at your teeth, and we might want to get you some face protection, because I don't know what those idiots are doing, but you should be wearing a mask when you're out there. And we need to check your gums a lot more often than the average person, make sure your teeth aren't getting concreted here. Your profession may drastically change. So you need to take a patient history. It's now not just a nice thing to do to help take care of it, it's a requirement. So the Canadian standard is slightly different than the American standard. Now, the American standard has been shifting to the Canadian standard in practicality. They'll talk about the importance of taking a history. Their focus does seem to be a little bit more focused on in order to give good treatment. Because they didn't have a similar court case. Ours is part of our legal framework that they have to. You can sue a doctor in Canada if they didn't take a reasonable history and they did something that they should have known about you if they had just asked. So this was a landmark Canadian decision. The standard for disclosure is not a reasonable medical standard, the average rational person, but the reasonable patient in the patient's position. So they have to take that average person and put them in your position. So what would the average person who's 1.5 years away from a pension want? What would the average person who's working in concrete want to know? And then knowing the risks, would they have consented to the treatment? So you have to talk to your patients. There's limits. You don't have to know everything. There may be some things that you would never know. There is also now a requirement on the patient to be honest. You go to your doctor and you tell them something, they're not allowed to tell anybody else. So if you see your doctor without your parents and you say, hey, I'm sexually active and I mainline heroin every day, they will have significant concerns. But you're now mature minors. It's very likely they can't tell anybody. Certainly once you're an adult, they absolutely can't tell. But even in the province of British Columbia, we have some of the strongest protections for mature minors, which is what you are. We'll discuss that a little bit in the future. This has irritated people lately because you can decide, for example, on hot button issues, you can decide to get an abortion entirely on your own without informing your parents, and people involved are not allowed to tell anybody. You can decide to get birth control. You can decide that you need treatment for an STI. All of this is you, because you, it has been decided in BC courts, are a rational person. You just lack knowledge, but you're certainly rational at 12, 13, 14, 15, sometimes 11 and 10. It really depends on the person involved. But if a doctor crosses that, they can be in quite a bit of trouble if it finds out afterwards and the court says, no, they were entirely rational. Their concerns are well-founded. You told their parents and their parents kicked them out of the house. Obviously, you shouldn't have told the parents. That had a negative effect on their health. That is the standard, however, strongly in BC. In other places for that standard of not telling anybody, you might have to be an adult. Certainly it differs state by state, and it even differs a little bit by province. BC has the strongest ones, but mature minor is a Canadian thing across many provinces as well. Oh, geez. 9:19. Apologies. I meant to give you a break at 9. Is everybody getting the point form on that? You have 5 minutes to relax your brain before I blast you again.
Guess how many trophies I got in Hyper? 600 trophies. 780.
Oh, I just went to the pencil.
945.
I literally went to a basketball court.
Martinelli.
I go for it. They're considered antiques. Basically, they don't have what they want. They're
The gun,
Oh, they're like.
it's in the.
No, it's like that here.
The left one. I have like 2
But they still have it. I still have it. They ban it.
I don't know, the thing about my team is they're so versatile. Jason R.
Hot ones. And there's no Jason 1, Jason 2. At most.
I don't feel bad with Jason. I know.
My dad.
Mr. Neufeld,
Yep.
just that last bit, the last paragraph there.
So, the U.S. standard is average reasonable person, and this ensured that we had to put in. I actually haven't put it in here. Take a history.
Okay.
Because you have to, would a reasonable person, oh, that's the wrong highlighter, I'm going to use this one. That's the new one, in the patient's position.
So like, would your history include like how soon you're retiring?
Might be, what do you do for a living?
Right.
How old are you? And retirement is a normal thing that happens to most people, so it'd be expected that there are life changes that happen that point. So like, oh, you're 60, are you thinking of retiring
So
soon?
that's what they do in Canada. It's like, okay.
They're required.
And this case is in Canada, right?
Yeah.
And that's like
All
what-
the cases I will do will be
and that's what made it now that we have to take a history
Yeah.
is from that example.
is from that example. That was the first case that required. Just like we did the case with the Jehovah's Witness and the assault. Just like that case said, it doesn't matter if you save your life. If the patient doesn't consent, you can't. So that established that. Now, like I said too, it's not just Canada. UK seems to be evolving towards this. The US has evolved towards this.
Well, it seems a lot safer. This is a lot less risk.
Yeah, yeah. And it, you know, oh, I did this because that's what the average person would want. And I'm like, yeah, but they're a teenager, and the risk was either a lifetime of a debilitating disease right now, or just this chance it might happen. They might instantly, a teenager might make a very different choice versus somebody during the end of their life.
Yes.
So you have to take their position into account.
We're actually gonna lose.
19. No, 24.
We're gonna lose this smooth.
I'll go to 25.
Wait, Brandon.
I know, I think they're
I'm not. I'm already out. I know it's.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you. Put phones away, laptops down. Don't trip over the couch, Mr. Neufeld. Okay, we're in last 10 minutes. I just want to finish it up. It is in time. I will bring you an episode of a medical TV show next day, and we will analyze the types of informing that is going on, and maybe some of the other issues in there, so that we can do a little bit of practice with this, because this is a lot, I know, and a lot of notes. So we're going back to objective reasonable person. So the problem was it doesn't take into account the specific patient. So their unique snowflakeness. They are unique like everybody else, but that uniqueness can determine how you treat them. I think the most recent issue that this has, not most recent, this has been ongoing for a decade actually, but we find that people who are in a hospital have very different outcomes depending on what race they present at intake. And knowing that, for example, if they present with high pain, they may get very different treatments depending on the bias of the doctors and the system in terms of, are they pain-seeking, drug addict, or do they have a legitimate condition? And if you are a white female under, under 5'6", For pain, you get absolutely the best medical care in the world. They just trust everything you say. You're small and you're cute and you're kind and they just believe you. They don't think that you're a drug user. Terrible. If you are male, white, you are far more likely to get the surgery you need. All sorts of outcomes change. And so knowing this, that is now an expectation in many hospitals. They have new guidelines. If a patient appears and they're like this, knowing the differences in care, you must consider these extra factors. You must do these extra tests. They differentiate based on that because we know we're failing in certain areas. That we should have no difference in outcome depending on what they look like. And so that's doing in the patient's positions on a broad scale. You can't make these assumptions because it is literally affecting patients' outcomes. You have a higher chance of death. When I said female, that depends on the type of pain. If you have generalized pain and you're female, regardless of gender, you are far more likely to be sent home and die of an appendicitis than if you are male and you present with pain. And we know why. Yeah?
Because they just assume that you're on your period.
Yeah, it's your cycle. Go home. It's fine. And there's many a story of afterwards. Like I went back to the doctor. They sent me home again. I went to a different hospital. I finally got a female nurse, female doctor to listen to me. They checked. I had appendicitis. If I'd gone home, I would have died. And so dismissing patient concerns because we have biases towards them is one of the areas that this takes in. So the objective reasonable person in the patient's position is the Canadian standard. This is then the same as number 4, but we just add in the patient's position. And it came about because of Revo versus Hughes. The doctor has a duty to find out about the patient and must give the information unasked. So once I find out that you are a teenager, nearing retirement, adolescent, in your 30s and have a really high fatty diet, there are a tons of information I now have to disclose that you might not even know that you should have asked. So you change the information based on the patient. If under that circumstance a patient comes in with pain and the patient dismisses it, like I've gone in for this and I think it is just part of my cycle, the doctor may be like, no, we know now that this often masks appendicitis. We're going to test you for it, where maybe we wouldn't do that for another patient because we don't know. You have a duty to find out and what difference that finding out makes in your treatment. There is also nothing about signing a form ethically here. Signing a form is just a way to prove that we gave you the information, but it means nothing. If you can prove that you honestly would not have known, the signing doesn't mean anything. I mentioned before, there's a plastic surgeon I know in Victoria. He not only tells them about all the pitfalls of plastic surgery, and they sign a form, but the form doesn't matter. He films them watching a video on all of the poor outcomes of plastic surgery. So here's how it can go wrong. Here's what will happen to your lips, your nose, your cheeks. If the surgery doesn't go right and you heal badly, here's how bad it can look. And he shows patient after patient in which that has happened to. So that afterwards, when it's not exactly like they liked, because people who get plastic surgery sometimes are very concerned about their appearance. So even though it's not anything to do with the skill of the doctor, they'll still be upset and they may still take him to court. And then he'll show, I informed them. And this is why the school can get away with saying, well, we know you're not reading the document of the student handbook, but you signed a form. It's not because you signed the form. It's because we sent it to you over the summer. We sent it to your parents. We put it on our website. Your house parents will tell you to read it. We have messaged that this is important in so many ways. At some point, the court will go, yeah, you did everything reasonable. They just chose not to read it. And if your defense is like, but everybody chooses not to read it. And then they would go like, yeah, but at that level, other than taking your head and forcing you to read the document, what else could they have done? And they accept that. This is why we make you sign the form in the science labs saying that you're going to be safe. You're underage. That form means nothing. But it shows that we at least did the good faith effort to tell you you have to be safe. So it's not our fault if you decide to I don't know, spray acid in your own eyes. We told you not to do that. And don't, because I've never heard of this happening to a student before until one asked me, can I do this? And apparently they learned this at another school. So this is just a chemistry. Don't mouth pipette. Mouth pipette is when you take the straw and you suck up the chemical to the right level and then move it to another one. And now that I just told you, I've now told you something that you now didn't know before that you could do. So maybe I actually increased the rate. But the reason for that is most cases you suck up too much. It gets in your mouth and now you've maybe poisoned yourself. There's a teacher at the school who sucked up 1 molar hydrochloric acid because he was mouth pipetting. We're having a staff meeting in that room, and he wanted to do it quickly, and it's way easier to suck it up, the pipette, than it is to use the bulb. It's way faster. If you're really good at it, you can do it quick. It used to be a thing that they did in the 40s and 50s. So he sucked it up, got it to the right level, and then sort of hiccuped accidentally and went poosh in his mouth. Instantly, blinding pain all through. It's 1 molar hydrochloric acid. But he didn't want to let the head of school at the time know that he did something that stupid, so he very casually walked to the sink and spat it out, and the entire inner lining of his mouth came with it, just red everywhere. Said it took about 6 months to completely heal. He survived, he's fine. He's got a little bit of scarring. Your mouth is actually quite good at healing. If you ever bitten your cheek, you know that. But his teeth had never been so white. Beautifully white. And as his dentist said, really brittle. You need to be very careful with them now. It took an entire outer layer off of them. But so white. Looked really good. Had the best smile for a long time. Okay. So, ethically, you need to know that you've given them every opportunity to understand. You've gone over it. House parents, we repeat most of the stuff that's in your documents in a house meeting. And I still have 2 minutes, so we're going to get a head start on the next topic. 2 minutes. Standards for informed consent. Let's go, next page. I've got 30 seconds. If your patient doesn't speak your language, or you make an assumption about them that's unfounded, and you give them the wrong information, like, I don't know, assuming they're from Mexico because they speak Spanish instead of from Spain, you have made a mistake. You have to give it into a language they understand. That means if an elderly person comes into your office and they've only had a grade 8 education, you got to gear it down to a grade 8 education. You have bad blood. Your blood is bad because your liver isn't working properly. So we need to replace your blood. We're going to take out the bad blood, put in the good blood. That's perfectly fine with someone with a grade 8 education. You don't need to talk about white blood cells and red blood cells. So no doctor's bill. Okay, next day, I'm promising a film of some kind. Oh, next type of assessment. You are going to have an in-class essay. I am going to show you a short film that is about an ethical situation. You will need all of this information to address it because you're going to discuss it about that situation. It will be open book. So having a good set of notes will be important. It will be on everything. So you'll see all of that. Informed consent. I'm hoping to do some comment description. Yeah, I'm going to make open book. Open book isn't an advantage. But
I know you say to scum it down, but every single note is
there.
there.
Good. I mean, it's not bad. As long as you're keeping up. Most times, like, I can't keep up with at university, I couldn't keep up with a lecture, so being able to summarize turned out to be valuable.
I've always wrote very fast, but my handwriting's always been terrible. But now it's legible. I think.
Good.
For me, at least.
I'll talk to the class or remind me to. The other thing you can do is put tabs on your book. So here's utilitarianism. Here's what this is. Open book tests. Because I'll talk to the class a little bit, are a little bit different from closed book tests, because now I don't care if you can tell me the definition of something. What I care is, did you analyze it to the situation? Because you have your books.
Thank you.
And that's what I'm more interested in. And that's a more university level type of analysis. So yeah, But if you don't have your notes, of course, you're at a disadvantage. So I want to make sure everybody was warned.
Also checks if people have actually wrote notes.
Yes. Have you been keeping up? Well, in every other class I have,